What did you think of the film? Agreed. It was thought-provoking and heavy. And to give us a little bit more insight on this incredible film, we'll welcome Byron Hurt. Come on up, Byron. If you enjoyed it, let him know. Byron, before we get started, can you tell our guests tonight how you started and how you ended up here tonight?
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming out on a weekday evening at this time. I really appreciate your support. It warmed my heart, really, to see how many people showed up tonight. So I just want to thank you all for being here and for sticking through the whole film. Because this festival was a really important festival for me to show this film, to screen this film, because this is a very important audience to me here at this festival. So I want to thank you all for your presence tonight. To answer your question, it was really just as I stated in the opening narration for the film. I saw and read a couple of stories in the newspaper. The first one was a story of George Daydoun, and I read that story in the New York Times, and I was on an airplane, and as I read that story, I really got choked up because it reminded me so much of my own personal experience and what could have happened to me, but more significantly, what I could have done to someone else. And that was the first inkling, that was the first moment where I thought about making a documentary film about this topic, but I was very reluctant to do so because I knew it would be very controversial for me to take on something like this. And then I was at home and I watched the news story of Robert Champion, the Florida A&M marching band member, and I sat down on my couch and I said, I gotta do this. I gotta make a film that contextualizes the culture of hazing and that deconstructs it. And I felt, honestly, like I was the perfect person to tell this story because of my background doing gender violence prevention work and educating boys and men about the culture of masculinity and my firsthand experience with a pledge process in which hazing was a big part of. So that's when I decided to talk to some funders about the film. And that was the beginning, the early stages of making the film.
Gotcha. Have you had a lot of backlash?
Yes. But I've also received a tremendous amount of support. And this film, you should know, premiered almost a year ago. And when the film premiered, there wasn't a whole lot of backlash. It premiered virtually at Tribeca. But the film also broadcast nationally on PBS, and shortly before the broadcast, there was a 30-second trailer that we released to promote the film, and that's when I first started to receive a tremendous amount of backlash. But I also received a lot of private, quiet support. So there were two different forms of responses, types of responses. There was a response that was very public and very loud from people who had not seen the film. But then there was also a tremendous amount of support, private emails, messages, phone calls, text messages from many people, including many of my own fraternity brothers, who thanked me for making the film. So there was a dynamic there that was very interesting and very strange and very uncomfortable for me to experience, when the film made its national television premiere.
Gotcha. The last numbers that we saw from hazing deaths was in 2021. Mm-hmm. Have those numbers increased, or because of the light that you've shed, have they improved?
They haven't. I haven't heard of any deaths since 2021. Now, remember, that was the pandemic. So 2020, 2021, there was not a lot of attendance on college campuses. And so I don't know if people caught that point, but there was zero during the pandemic because there was no school on college campuses. But there has been a huge case that has gone public at Northwestern University of their football program, and I don't know if any of you have heard about it, but it's a huge national hazing scandal at Northwestern University. And we showed this film at Northwestern in May on their campus. And so a few months later, that's when the hazing story broke. I don't know if our film had an impact on someone coming forward, but we did have a presence on their campus with this film.
Gotcha. Do you believe that there have been changes? We see that there are suspensions. Some of the sororities, fraternities are being suspended, but are you seeing real change?
Yes and no. I do believe that most organizations, regardless of the kind of organization, whether it's a BGLO, Black Legal Led organization, or a predominantly white organization or team, sports team, I think that there's an effort to try and change the culture of the organizations through policy, through trainings. I know the AKAs, I heard that the AKAs showed parts of this film at their recent leadership conference, which I was very happy about. I know that even in my organization, there are efforts to address violence and hazing in our organization, but it's a very, very, very difficult culture to change. It's very, very persistent and resistant to change because there are many people who hold on to these long-held beliefs that this is the best way to bring in new members into the organization, or to bring in new members, or to police new members of your team, as is the case with Northwestern University and their football team, right? So I think that there's a lot of work still remains to be done to really change the culture. And I really think that it's going to take a lot of courage and a lot of leadership, but I think it's going to require a lot more training and education. And I mean real training and education. I'm not talking about a check-the-box, 1 hour program, that you have for your chapter or for your team, but like real intensive training that's ongoing and that's consistent. And I think that we have to create space, and I hope that this film creates space for leaders who are opposed to hazing culture to stand up and to confront it.
One more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. We saw a lot of tragic situations. Was there one that was that hit you the hardest?
Kristen and Kenitha, their story hit me the hardest. I read their story late at night in my office, my home office, and I read that story probably around the same time that it actually happened. So it was very late at night, and I was by myself reading the story of what happened to them, and I cried. I mean, it really, really had an impact on me because I could not imagine being in that kind of situation. I could not imagine my own child being in that kind of situation in the dark of night, in an ocean, one person not having the ability to swim, the other person trying to save them, how terrified they must have been in that moment. That was a story that I think stayed with me the most.
That one was tough. Yeah. Any questions from the audience? I'm sorry.
I hear your question. I can repeat it if you like.
Yeah, by not really knowing how many others suffered severe body injuries, as the brother who managed to, settle for a couple million.
Well, the deaths are documented, right? Many of those deaths, there may be some inaccuracies because there are many cover-ups. Sometimes they can't prove that someone's death was related to a hazing practice or hazing ritual or planned event, as Pamela Champion refers to it as, and others refer to it as. So the data that exists has been accumulated by several people, including a man named Hank Newer, who has a website that documents the hazing deaths. But to your point, the numbers of people who have been affected by bodily damage, bodily harm, emotional, psychological harm is unknown because people don't talk about it. And it's interesting that you asked that question because I've been here for a couple of days now and I've run into several people who are either have seen the film or aware of this film, and they've shared with me their own personal stories, right? That was probably the most significant thing that happened when the film was released. People shared their personal stories with me, their personal trauma, the psychological damage. I had one of my fraternity brothers reached out to me and told me that he broke down and he wept when he watched the film. His wife came home and saw him on the ground crying and thought someone died. He then told me that one of his big brothers called him and apologized to him after watching the film, and how much of a release that was for him because he said that he was treated really harshly by that particular individual. And so I've been receiving a lot of stories like that over and over again. And so I think the amount of people who have been affected is unknown, honestly. But I think it was really important to include some of those stories that included some of the psychological and emotional damage in addition to the physical harm and the deaths, because that's probably the majority of people, because most people do survive the process. But how many people are still impacted by what they went through?
Byron, my name is B. Harris, and I'm from Denver, Colorado. This was phenomenal. So I have a couple of questions because I know that you went through trauma and there's others that went through trauma. Are there plans or have you thought about, it sounds like PTSD. Is there any plans to reach out to some who have gone through this trauma, or is there any statistics, or is there any history? Because it sounds like, PTSD is part of this, just like the military, just like car accidents. Is there any plans for that? And my second question is, we have a big film festival in Denver in November. Have you reached out to have it shown in Denver?
What kind of festival is it?
Denver Film Festival.
No, I have
Denver
not.
International Film Festival. It's a very big film festival. But I'd like to present that. I know someone there, and I think it would be great to have it screened in Denver in November.
Yeah. I wasn't aware of it. I was thinking that this was going to be my last film festival for this film, but I'm down to come out to Denver. I got relatives out there, so I'll roll out there.
Great.
To answer your question, we're working right now with Stop Hazing, which is an organization that is one of the largest research-based organizations that deals with hazing and hazing culture. And so that's something that we are factoring into our discussion guides, is the emotional trauma, the PTSD, as you mentioned, some of those other things. So yes, we are addressing that. Thank you for your question.
We can take two more.
Hi, my name is Anthony Green. I think this starts in high school sports. That's where it starts before it gets to colleges. I sat on the school board in a town, and a lot of high school sports teams start with varsity athletes hazing junior varsity athletes as a rite of passage to come in. So by the time kids get to college, particularly the athletes, whether they continue to play or don't play, it's where a lot of it starts. So it really needs to be shown, I think, at high schools. I think it'd be very helpful.
Thank you. And you make a very good point. I experienced hazing on my high school football team. In addition to being just in my high school in general, there was a hazing culture in my high school for incoming freshmen. So people are primed before they go to college to endure and experience hazing. Thank you for that point.
I'm sorry, we have one here. That lady's been, okay.
First of all, I found the film to be very enlightening and emotionally touching. But my question to you is, in terms of systemic change, did you get an opportunity to talk to the national organizations? And you mentioned there are policies that have changed, and maybe take a trend line, not only just with deaths, but the type of injuries that might be occurring on campus. Another data point you might want to look at is organizations do expel members from the organization when they have been identified or it's been determined that they have hazed, although it may not lead to a death, but those are the kinds of systemic things that can change the culture.
Yeah, that's true.
That's right, Kathy.
I don't know where that came from, but yes, that's true. That is true. I have been in touch with a few organizations, national organizations, BGLOs, that have been supportive of the film. I do want to acknowledge Zeta Phi Beta, who has shown the film, and they're using the film for their anti-hazing campaign. And I'm hoping that others will join them. I mentioned earlier that the AKA showed at their leadership conference. I think that every single organization, especially BGLO, should show this film, but I also think that this should be seen at every high school and every college campus in the country. And I hope that that will happen.
Gotcha. I'm sorry, we did have one more. This woman has been very patient. You're going to have to talk really loud because the mic is, oh, here comes the mic. Hold on.
It's hard for me to see where the question is coming from.
Yeah, the last one.
All right. Hello. Hi. Hi, Byron. This was wonderful, and it was very brave of you to take on this effort. I'm also a part of sorority as well, so I think you did a wonderful job of showing all kinds of sides of this, and also not only Black, but you showed other ethnicities as well as different groups and organizations as well, so kudos. I'm curious to know, with all your research, is there a way that intake or the pledging process could be more constructive and have more just constructive processes or things that may not include violence, but you can still instill some kind of camaraderie or still build up your members in just a more constructive way versus what we have right now? Or do you just feel like it's just anti-hazing just altogether? That's is there still a middle ground for new members?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. Thank you, first of all, for your comment. I really appreciate it. It was really important for myself and my team to create a film that was not going to focus solely on Black Greek-led organizations. My funders, when I first approached my funders about making this film, they were more interested in a film that focused only on Black Greek-led organizations, and they felt like that was my entry point, that was my experience, and that's what people were going to be more interested in, fascinated by, quote unquote, fascinated by. But I felt like as a filmmaker, it would be extremely irresponsible for me to do so, especially when you see the numbers of white deaths that experience hazing. So it was really important. It was really important for me to try and cover the bases and show that this is an issue that transcends race and culture and also class on some level. And so that was a stated goal of mine, was to create something that was diverse. And I still don't think it's as diverse as it could be. There were 2 Asian military stories that we had to cut from the film. That involved 2 young Asian men who died by suicide as a result of being hazed. We had to cut those stories because we had to, cut the film down for time. So thank you for acknowledging that. I appreciate that. But to answer your question, there are ways to bring in new members and create lasting experiences or lasting relationships and bonds that don't include dangerous and risky hazing. I've heard stories. I've heard people who have been really strong contributors to their organizations without going through a process that involved hazing. And I think it's important to know, and maybe I could have done a better job of doing this in the film, but you have to think about organizations as like your family, right? Like in some family homes, there may be some abuse. Some other homes, the children may be raised in a healthy environment, right, where there is no corporal punishment, right? And it's kind of like the same way in Black Greek-led organizations and other organizations, where some organizations have a very reputable track record and reputation for having a hazing culture, okay? And others do not. And there are many organizations that are working really hard to change the culture of their organization and their chapter, right? And so I've talked to many people who are working on that, and I just hope that this film will give other chapters and organizations permission, right, to continue to work on changing the culture, because that's what is really necessary, is cultural change, especially within the organizations that have a really, they make it their calling card that is really difficult to get through their pledge process without being harmed in some way.
Thank
So
you.
I know that it's possible.
Thank you for that. Before we wrap, can you tell us about the next film?
I have another film that's coming out in 2023, late 2023 or early 2024, called Lee and Liza's Family Tree. It's a film that will air on PBS Nova. It's a science film, science-based film, and it's very different than this film. It features my family's quest, journey, to learn more about our oldest known matriarch and patriarch in our family using DNA research, over-the-counter DNA research. We can only go back to 1863 from our family. And so our family has an ancestry committee whose job it is to try and learn more about our family's ancestry. So that's my next film, and I hope that you'll look out for it. And I should say this too, before you all leave. This film will be available on Prime Video September 12th. It'll also be available on Comcast, Infinity, and iTunes. So please spread the word about the documentary and try and encourage people to watch it. Thank you all again for coming out. I really, really
Thank you so much, and
appreciate
thank you, Byron.
your support and your presence. Thank you. Thank you.